Hey, I want to welcome you to a conversation about race, about what's going on in our culture. And my name is Pastor Jimmy. I pastor a predominantly white church in Toledo, Ohio. And I'm here with a good friend of mine, Bishop Chris Rowell. And we're here at his place that he pastors, the Refreshing Place. And Bishop Chris and I have been friends for like 13 years. And I just love this guy. I so appreciate him. And I was sitting really wrestling with my own thoughts around the riots, the protests, lives that are being lost, and a lack of justice, and thinking, what can I do about it? And how do I understand this? How can I, as a middle-aged white man, join in? And so I reached out to my friend, Bishop Chris, and I said, man, would you want to sit down with me and have a conversation around this? And he said, absolutely. And so we're here, and we invite you. Hopefully, maybe you're sitting there and thinking to yourself, that's me. I want to get involved. I want to get connected. I want to know how I can support. I want to know what God has to say to us about that. And that's what we're about. And so I just have some questions that I'm going to share with the bishop here. And he's going to share just from his heart, from his soul, from his experience. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say, and I hope you are too, and I hope this benefits everyone who listens to it. So Bishop Chris, thank you for joining me, and once again spending time together. Man, I'm sorry we haven't had this conversation before, that it's taken this long to have a conversation about race,
Sure.
About justice, about social justice, about God's word around this. For those of you who don't know, his church and my church, we partner together, we do worship services together. Those are some of the best times that we have, black and white churches coming together.
Sure. And
it's become such a common place for our people and his people, and it's just a joy to work together. And I think that the heart of God is blessed when we have these services. So let me start by asking you this question. What do you see right now? What do you feel with the movement that's happening in our country, and why do you think it's happening?
what I see today is an amazing movement. It is a movement that is almost long overdue. It's a movement that is necessary. As I said to you earlier, this feels different. This is different than anything else that I've experienced. When you experience, and the list goes long, man. I mean, we could talk about injustice and brutality that has happened for years since I've been alive. Abdul Louima, who in New York was trying to open his front door, and this is years ago. Google it, Abdul Louima. Google it, trying to open his door, and they thought he was a burglar, and he wasn't. He was trying to get his own house, and he was trying to let them know, I live here. And he was shot by the police trying to get into his own house. And we could go back there, but then you talk about like the Michael Browns and Sandra Bland's and Philando Castiles and all these names that I could name, but let's just be honest, it started with one name, Emmett Till. In 1954-55, Emmett Till was falsely accused of whistling at a white woman.
Yeah, I remember this.
And a 14-year-old boy from Chicago is who he was, and he's down south visiting his aunt and uncle. And on his first day there, he's going to the Five and Dime to just get candy and soda pop. Walking home, he gets falsely accused. And they drag him out of his aunt and uncle's house in the middle of the night and beat him to death. When they found him with a tire rim around his neck at the bottom of the lake, bricks to his feet, and they totally beat him unrecognizable. Now, Mamie Till had the funeral. They tried to tell her not to do an open casket because he was hideous to look at. But she said, I want the world to see what racism and they did to my child, right? So that's where it started. Some people think the civil rights movement started with Rosa Parks not wanting to sit in the back of the bus. Yeah. For every action there's a reaction. That was Rosa's reaction to her being disgusted over the death of Emmett Till, right? So we really have to understand, if we don't understand where we've been, we'll never understand where we're going.
Right.
So it's really a generational reaction of what we see now. It is being tired. It is being sick and tired. Martin Luther King says lightning. Martin Luther King said, lightning makes no sound till it strikes. Lightning is just seen. But it's not considered dangerous until it hits something. See, we're not considered dangerous as black people until we shout and we cry out the injustice. But it's something that we've experienced all my 43 years. There isn't one year that I've taken off that I haven't experienced racism, injustice, some form of something. So what you're seeing right now, it's a reaction to being fed up. It's a reaction because now these young people are experiencing what their grandmothers and great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers were talking to about, segregation. But in 2020, to see it, to experience it, it's totally blown them away. But the reason why we're saying it is because it's time to rise. It is time to rise. It is time to stand up for what we believe, because an injustice to people anywhere, if we don't do it, it's going to be an injustice to people everywhere, Dr. King says, right? So what we're seeing now is just an uprising because of being sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. So both you and I, Bishop Chris, we lead churches. What would you say is the American church, specifically the white church, blind to in regards to racism, and how has the American church kind of propagated racism or kept it going without maybe even knowing it?
What many people don't understand is that racism is everywhere. It has been something that we've dealt with. It's something that we have just kind of not just looked over, but it's something that we deal with in every day, and so we've built a thick skin to it. And it's just something that we see, and then we just kind of keep walking, right? And then when we think about it later, then it bothers us, right? But it's something that we've dealt with and that we've been dealing with. It's in the church too, believe it or not. It's in the church. Division is in the church. And it's unfortunate. It's our different styles of worship, our different beliefs. Our different styles of worship and our different beliefs stop us from fellowshipping and stop us from congregating and stop us from connecting, because if I believe one thing and we operate one way and you may not operate one way, or your thing, then maybe to one congregation over to another, we may be too radical. But you have to understand it's our culture. In order to understand, let's say, black church, all right? I'm fortunate to pastor a diverse congregation. So it's easy to go into the suburbs and see black people in white churches. But it's very hard to have a black pastor in the inner city and have white people cross over from the suburbs to come into the inner city. Yeah. And when they do, they feel like I need to come to the inner city so I can be a help or savior. Right. When that's not why God's placing you there. He's placing you there for you to get an understanding of a people and get an understanding of a culture. I don't know if it's Dr. King or who said, but it said 11 o'clock is the most segregated time in America. Yep. White people go off to do their worship. Black people go off to do their worship. And the thing that I thank God for is our relationship once a year we fellowship in a baptism, service, and barbecue or picnic. Our people look forward to it every year because it's a great time of fellowship, right? And I know we probably won't have it this year because, as we say, the corona has affected it.
Yeah.
But that's something that both our churches look forward to every year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just unfortunate that racism is still in the church, you know. And it's unfortunate that we still have to have this conversation. Racism should not be in the church. Let me say that. Because the love of God ought to dispel all of that. Because in him, he said, there is no Jew nor Gentile, right?
Slave or free.
Right? So there ought to be no systemic racism at all in the church. It should be God. It should be kingdom. It should be, because here's the thing, and I said this at the Christmas service. I'm amazed how he can take his red blood, wash over my black soul, and I come out whiter than snow, right? And so the only color he sees is red, and that's the blood of Christ. So there should be no racism. But unfortunately, we have to have this conversation, and it is. Honestly, it starts with leadership. Period. It starts with leadership. Starts with leadership. Hatred is not something that you are born with. That is something you must be taught.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And you see these images of kids of different races playing with each other, hugging each other, having no problems, no issues, until a point in their formation.
Come on.
Where it shifts.
Where? But where does it shift?
Yeah.
It shifts from someone older. It shifts from someone in authority over them. They had to see something, hear something, experience something, right? And it all starts with our leadership. Let me give you Martin Luther King. Freedom is never given freely by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. So freedom is never given freely by the oppressor, but it must be demanded by the oppressed, right? And you cannot deny that throughout history there have been certain classes of people targeted.
Sure.
Hello, what was the Holocaust about?
Right.
Right? So, and our Jew brothers and sisters were targeted by the Nazis. So you cannot say that a certain class or race of people have never been targeted, right? If that's the case, then why did Pharaoh afflict the Hebrews? A class and race of people targeted, right? It's been going on for thousands, hundreds of years. What you're seeing now is a rising up of a people who have been targeted for decades, centuries, generations. And it's what it is.